Times woman caused chaos on paternity court.
Why didn't the man look for me? Why didn't he come find me? I'm right there. I don't even know what Mr. Miller died from.
I cheated on Mr. Mason. We was having problems in our relationship because the simple fact he was not showing me any attention. He just wasn't being a man that I expected him to be.
Miss Lee has recently found out that the man that raised her isn't actually her father, and her real father is dead. Frances believes that Miss Lee is her real sister, and now Miss Lee is given the time to tell the courtroom that this is a tough position for her to be in, one in which she has to accept that she was raised by someone who isn't her father. But the idea of siblings does indeed intrigue her.
From the beginning of this has been real confusing and overwhelming for me, mainly because I only knew one man to be my father my whole life until he died. I was a daddy's baby, and with me and my father was very close. I never heard of Mrs. Frances' father until I was 38 years old. So it's been real hard for me.
Frances goes on to tell the courtroom how she was previously informed that Sonia died from AIDS, but her father did not believe this was the case on his deathbed. And as it turns out, Frances' sister Davis found Sonia.
Well, I started on Facebook and I couldn't find her on Facebook nowhere. And by my dad passing away, and one of our friends is her friend. And the picture popped up and I looked, I said, she's right there. She's not gone, my sister's not dead.
Oh my goodness.
So I started Facebooking.
Miss Lee starts telling the court on how she came in contact with Davis. Originally, she was ignoring her, but then after a spam of messages, she spoke to Davis and was confused as to what Davis was talking about, because she went from being one man's daughter to now someone else's daughter, and being dead, and in another man's obituary.
Maybe after 3 or 4 messages, I finally responded to I responded to Miss Davis, where we exchanged numbers and I called her and she just started spilling the story out, and it was like, whoa, wait a minute, slow down. You know, I'm your sister, I know you don't know this or understand it, but I'm like, wait a minute, so now I went from being one man's child whose name I carry.
Miss Lee is a little confused on how, even after living in such a small town, she didn't know whether it was her real family or not. When she initially brought this to her mother outright refused it. Miss Lee has some doubts, but ultimately, she is heartbroken on the childhood she missed out on.
I grew up in a small city, and then to be this close to my family and not know it did hurt me. Yes, I had a father, but if I had something, so I kind of had some resentment about that. You know, they knew about me, I didn't know about them. My mom knew, my dad knew, but nobody told me. And then even when I got old enough to understand and accept it, nobody told me.
Miss Lee's mother explains to the court how she was involved romantically with Frances' father, but upon her being pregnant, Frances' father disappeared from her life. Mr. Lee, the man who brought Miss Lee up, was with her during the time of the pregnancy and took care of them both. Did Miss Lee have a right to know about this?
I never told her because I didn't think she needed to know.
I had a right to know, and it was things going on. I did have a right to know. At the same time, Your Honor, I'd like to say, at the same time, they knew. If he knew, why didn't the man look for me? Why didn't he come find me? I'm right there.
All of these disasters have made Miss Lee emotional. It looks like she might cry in court. She's uncertain if the truth is that she does have siblings, and she's unwilling to accept that truth until the DNA tests come back. She wants her children to have the opportunities that she didn't have, so long as the results do come back indicating that Frances and Davis are indeed her siblings.
I'm scared both ways, I guess, because if it come back that it's not, it's gonna hurt me, because I already have love for both of these women.
And we love you too.
And we love you too.
I'm scared to embrace it because if it ain't real, and I'm scared to embrace it, so that's why it was so important for me to find out the truth. People will say, you know, well, why go through with it now? Y'all grown. We got kids.
Jerome hands Judge Lauren the envelope, and a silence enters the courtroom. Will Miss Lee find out whether she does indeed have siblings? Or will this all be a facade built by Frances' father and a lie that will haunt Miss Lee the rest of her life? It's time for the results.
Ms. Lee, they are indeed your biological brother and sister.
I love you. All right.
I told you.
He can rest and you can be happy.
He can rest and you can be happy knowing that we are here. Okay?
Mr. Mason is uncertain about the paternity of 1-year-old Avery due to Miss Malone's alleged infidelity. He had suspicions about her fidelity and set up a watchdog to monitor her activities while he was away, which unveiled men coming and going from their home. While Miss Malone admits to cheating, she is confident that Mr. Mason is Avery's biological father.
Okay, when me and Miss Malone actually first met, we met on a website. I took her out on a date. We went to somewhere to eat.
So this started out as a regular courtship?
Yes,
You
Your
went
Honor.
on a date?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Mason and Miss Malone in an on and off relationship for 3 years, currently cohabit despite being off. Mason remains primarily for the children in hopes of reconciliation. The impending DNA results are crucial, as they not only indicate their relationship, but also their shared living situation.
I had somebody tell me that she was going out the back door and down the alley to jump in somebody's car.
I was actually coaching a local cheerleading team in our city. A guy had came to pick me up to take me to our game that we had that day. It was no relations, it was, we were strictly friends.
After quickly moving in together post their meeting, Miss Malone felt overwhelmed as her relationship with Mr. Mason intensified. Although initially unintended, their cohabitation soon led to a deeper relationship than she anticipated. Mr. Mason, suspecting Malone of deceit, employed a friend to monitor his front door, taking on a detective-like role.
I had a friend watching my front door who lived right across from where we lived at.
Oh, you had a watchdog, right?
Yes, Your Honor, every time I went to work. She blamed it on because me and her wasn't having any intimacy or anything like that.
Do you remember that confrontation, Miss Malone?
Yes, Your Honor.
And then what did you respond?
I told him that it was my father that came to the door.
Miss Malone admitted to not using protection during her affair, while also being intimate with Mr. Mason during the possible conception period. Upon learning she was pregnant, she informed both men of the possibility of them being the father. She claims to have disclosed the infidelity and its implications to Mr. Mason.
However, I told him as soon as I found out I was pregnant with her. He had so much anger, he decides to announce it with a room full of our friends and my mom.
Your Honor, I had anger for the simple fact that I was working all these hours trying to provide for my family.
Mr. Mason shared a memory of announcing Miss Malone's pregnancy in front of others, suggesting doubt over Avery's paternity. In this public setting, he stated the child might not be his. Additionally, Miss Malone presented a Facebook post where they conversed about their oldest and youngest child, further highlighting the contention surrounding Avery's paternity.
It has been determined by this court. Mr. Mason, you are not her father. What are you feeling in this moment, sir?
I'm mad, Your Honor, but I can't be really mad about something that I already knew.
Miss White claims Mr. Flowers is the father of her 4-month-old Major and seeks $1,846.54 for childcare expenses. She alleges buying all of Major's necessities, while Mr. Flowers returned the few items he purchased. Mr. Flowers doubts paternity, suggesting White is targeting anyone with money.
Basically, I bought diapers, stroller, crib, detergent, toys. I bought everything for my son that he needs as an infant. He hasn't bought anything. The things he did buy, he took back to the store.
In an intense paternity court session, a woman was adamant about Mr. Flowers being the father due to their consistent unprotected sexual encounters. However, Mr. Flowers expressed doubt, mentioning their relationship lacked commitment, suggesting she might have other parents. When she informed him of her pregnancy, he apparently showed indifference.
Of course, this wasn't going to bother him.
Did you ever tell him you were pregnant?
Yes, ma'am. I actually inboxed him the pregnancy test.
And your response was?
Nothing.
No.
He never responded.
No.
And so all the way through your pregnancy, Mr. Flowers wasn't there? No doctor's appointment?
No.
Mr. Flowers recounted an incident when he spent the night at Miss White's place. She fell asleep and he saw an explicit text message from another man on her phone, which deepened his doubts regarding the child's paternity. These messages reinforced his suspicion that another man, Mr. Miles, might be the father of Major.
Actually, we only did it like 4 times.
So you just went out about 4 times. So this wasn't a relationship. It wasn't a committed relationship.
No.
Did you use protection?
I used protection at 3 times, but the last time I did.
Right. So therefore you understand that there's a possibility that you could be this child's father?
Possible.
Miss White vehemently denies telling Mr. Miles he might be the father, But Mr. Miles contradicts her, recalling a conversation where she did insinuate he might be the father. Mr. Miles, already a father of 8 children, believes he can recognize his own features in his kids.
All my kids look just like me, or they got some type of features. You see the baby?
That's your baby.
Do you see that baby in me? Bro, that is not my baby.
That's your baby.
That's not my baby. Look at that baby.
At the point you saw him and you didn't see your features, then what did you tell Miss White?
I didn't tell her at the time. I just said in my head like, wow, this is not my child.
Miss White's messages suggest she's seeking a father for her child who can provide financially. When confronted about the money-focused texts, she clarifies she means someone present daily and also contributing financially. However, her explanations don't convince everyone, making her appear as if she's chasing after money.
Being there physically,
But what I want you to
financially, all that.
understand, before your texts paint you as a woman that's just looking for money in all different directions, because I ain't gonna lie to you, that's kind of what it's
And
looking
it's not,
like.
It's not.
What
that's
I
not-
want to understand is it was this man you really wanted to be the father, but you knew you had sex with this man as well.
Yeah.
Whitfield confronts White, accusing her of being a homewrecker and disrupting her relationship with Mr. Miles. Miss White denies knowingly interfering in an existing relationship. The tension rises as Miss Whitfield claims that Miss White was aware of their relationship. The situation becomes even more complicated when Miss Whitfield reveals she found out about the baby through a mutual friend.
Mr. Flowers, you are the father.
Thank you, Chief. I already knew that.
That's cool.
Miss Whitfield and Mr. Miles, I know you are relieved.
Big relief.
But Miss White and Mr. Flowers, you all have some cooperation to work on.
Miss Smith is concerned about who her 4-month-old's father is. It could be either her fiancé, Mr. Booker, or her ex-boyfriend. The defendant is confused because when she started seeing her fiancé, she had recently broken up with her ex-boyfriend. And a month after having sex with Mr. Booker, she was pregnant.
I talked to Lamontre and I invited him to my birthday party a few days after we had sex. Once that happened, I was like really starting to like him and be interested. And a couple of weeks later, I felt like sick, so I decided to take a pregnancy test.
Okay.
And so it came back positive.
Mr. Booker gives his perspective on the situation and how when he found out Miss Smith was 6 weeks pregnant instead of 8, and that hurt him. And then she was open in her conversation with him regards to this situation, and that the only 2 people possible to be her baby's father is either him or her ex-boyfriend.
She said it may be a possibility. She was sure of who it was, and we was the only, me and her ex were the only 2 dudes that she was with during the time.
So she was open with you about that?
Basically, she was open and she was honest and straightforward, and I was cool about it, and it was understandable.
Miss Smith brings out a calendar to show her timeline of being sexually active, and even provides evidence in the courtroom which indicate that in her first 2 doctor appointments, the date she's given aligns with the time during she was with her ex. But the 3rd appointment, that's when disaster happened.
When was Lamontre born?
Lamontre was actually born March 12th.
Oh my goodness.
He was born premature. He was born 2 months early because I have an incompetent cervix, so that kind of prevents me from holding the child inside, so they have to do a surgery.
The court calls upon a doctor to understand this discrepancy, as Miss Smith's child was not only born premature, but the birth dates she was provided with are a month apart. The doctor explains that the original due date was a potential one, and since her periods are irregular, provided due dates can be irregular. However, the date given after the ultrasound is the most accurate one.
She has an ultrasound which clearly dates her at 7 weeks pregnant. So the doctor revises the due date to the date in May, the 13th. And that's because a first trimester ultrasound is going to be the most accurate way that you can date a pregnancy. And so that would make the date of conception in mid to late August.
Mr. Booker brings to notice how upon the birth of his alleged child, he was very confused, and so he used a DNA test provided by his cousin on the child whilst the child was in the NIC unit due to being born prematurely.
So the baby was 2 days old and you bought a home DNA test and went into the intensive care unit.
Yes, ma'am.
And what did the nurses and the doctor say?
Well, she said that it wouldn't be all is that accurate and whatnot, but She says some of the tests work, some of the tests don't, and
She advised us not to do it.
The at-home test has proven otherwise, but Mr. Booker is determined in his belief that the child is indeed his, and he just wants the DNA test to prove so as well, and Miss Smith believes in her heart too that Mr. Booker is the father. All that's left is for the judge to read out the results in front of her.
In the case of Smith v. Brooker, as it pertains to 4-month-old Lamontre Brooker, Mr. Brooker, you are not his father.